I got only 5 tickets, Dad, for Mom, Grandma, Auntie J, Kay, and my father. I'm sorry, there isn't enough for you. Faith didn't blink when she said it. Her voice was calm, almost casual, like she was reciting a grocery list. My chest tightened. My legs turned to stone. I could barely breathe as I stood there, watching her zip up her gown with her mother's help. If you love true revenge stories, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. For more, the little girl who once clutched my finger with her tiny hand and called me Daddy in that angelic voice. The child I tucked into bed every night. The young woman whose nightmares I chased away, whose tuition I paid, whose dreams I carried on my shoulders. Now, I wasn't invited. She said her father already had the last ticket. Not me. Her father, Jonathan, the man who vanished before she could even speak his name. The man who left her mother with a 3-month-old baby and a broken heart. The man who never sent a dime, never bought a birthday cake, never once showed up for a single milestone. And yet, that was the man who took my seat. My world blurred, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. I turned away before she could see the tears threatening to fall. I couldn't let her see me break. That night, long after the house grew quiet, I sat alone in the garage. The smell of motor oil and rust filled the air as I sank into the old wooden chair, my grease-stained hands trembling. And my mind drifted back to the beginning. Back to the day I first saw Janet. Back to the life I thought I was building. Before Janet, my world was simple, almost painfully so. Work, home, sleep. I was 32, single, and buried in the routine of fixing other people's broken cars. My evenings were often spent hunched over leftover takeout, listening to the sound of engines humming faintly in my ears even after I left the shop. My apartment was a dull, lonely box. No pictures on the walls. No laughter echoing down the hallway. Just the faint smell of grease clinging to my clothes and the ache of solitude. But that's where Janet appeared, like a sudden crack of sunlight on a cloudy day. There was a little retail store near the auto shop. Nothing fancy, just shelves of groceries, a few aisles of detergents, and a counter stacked with loaves of bread that filled the air with the warm smell of yeast. I started going there after work, at first for snacks or soda. Then, truthfully, just for her. Janet. She was behind the counter most evenings. Not glamorous, not flashy, but she had this quiet presence. A tired smile that somehow still lit up her face. Her eyes, though, they always seemed to carry a storm. Evening, Richard, she'd say, sliding change into my palm. Her voice was soft, soothing, like a lullaby. Evening, Janet. Long dead. Long enough. She'd smile faintly, but it never quite reached her eyes. Weeks passed like that. Small talk. Glances that lingered longer than they should. Until one evening, when the shop was nearly empty, I asked the question that had been burning in me. Let me take you out sometime. Her hands froze on the register. For a second, she just stared at me. Then she shook her head, gave a small, sad smile. I can't, Richard. I have a daughter. This isn't going anywhere. Her words stung, but I wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. So, then let me meet her, I said softly. I don't mind. That broke something in her. For the first time, I saw a real surprise flicker across her face, followed by a laugh. Not a happy one. A broken laugh. You don't understand, she said, shaking her head. She's my whole world. Any man who comes near me has to accept that. Then let me prove I can. That was the beginning. A week later, she introduced me to Faith. She was barely 6 months old, a tiny little thing with bright eyes that seemed too curious for her age. Janet cradled her nervously, as though expecting me to flinch at the sight of a baby. But I didn't. The first time I held Faith, she reached up and grabbed my beard with her chubby fists, giggling like I was the funniest man alive. Something inside me shifted that day. Jonathan, her so-called father, had rejected her before she even saw the light of day. He was lost in drugs, drifting in and out of rehab, vanishing when she was just 3 months old. To him, Faith was a burden. But to me, she was a gift. I remember whispering into her tiny ear, "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll never feel abandoned again." And I meant it. It didn't happen in some fancy restaurant with violinists and candlelight. No, it happened on the front porch of Janet's small rented house, with the creak of rusted hinges and the sound of crickets filling the air. Faith had just fallen asleep in her crib. I could still hear her faint coos drifting through the window. Janet and I sat side by side, watching the sky shift from orange to purple as the sun sank behind the rooftops. She looked tired, but beautiful. The kind of beauty that doesn't come from makeup or expensive dresses, but from resilience. My hands were sweaty as I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the velvet box I had carried for weeks. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. Janet. She turned to me, her face lit faintly by the dying light. I'm not just asking you, I said, voice trembling. I'm asking both of you. I love Faith like she's my own. I want to be her father. I want to be your husband. Will you let me? Her lips parted. For a moment, she just stared at me as though she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. Then her hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, Richard. Yes. I slid the modest ring onto her finger. It wasn't expensive. I couldn't afford diamonds on a mechanic's salary. But her hands trembled like it was the crown jewel itself. And that night, I became more than Richard the customer, more than Richard the friend. I became Richard, the man who chose to be a father. Our wedding wasn't grand. No sprawling cathedral or satin gowns. Just a small hall, barely decorated, the air filled with the scent of fried rice and stew made by Janet's relatives. I wore a plain suit. She wore a second-hand gown that hung just a little too loose on her shoulders. Faith, not yet too, wore a frilly white dress and kept giggling every time someone tried to make her sit still. When the pastor said, "Do you take this man?" Janet's voice cracked as she whispered, "I do." When he asked me, "Do you take this woman and her child?" I said, without hesitation, with all my heart. And when the rings were exchanged, I bent down, kissed Faith's tiny forehead, and whispered so only she could hear, "I do to you too, sweetheart." The guests clapped. Auntie J dabbed her eyes. Kay, barely a teenager then, grinned as he held Faith's little hands. It wasn't the kind of wedding people put in magazines, but to me, it was perfect. That day, I didn't just marry Janet. I married into fatherhood. Those first years were the happiest of my life. Faith would wobble into my arms when she learned to walk, giggle as I tossed her into the air, cling to me when she scraped her knees. She didn't call me stepdad. She didn't know what that word meant. To her, I was just dad. That was all that mattered. On her first birthday, I stayed up all night blowing balloons until my lungs burned. When she woke up and saw the living room filled with colors, her laugh was so bright it felt like the sun itself had broken into the room. On her first day of kindergarten, she clung to my leg, tears streaming down her face. I bent down, wiped her cheeks, and whispered, "Daddy will always be here when you come out." She sniffled, nodded, and walked inside. And true to my word, I was there, waiting outside that gate every single day. When she brought home drawings from school, stick figures of us holding hands, with my name scrawled underneath, I pinned them proudly on the refrigerator like priceless works of art. When she sang in her first Christmas play, Halo Crooked on her head, I clapped until my hands stung. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every whispered, "Good night, Daddy." I was there. Janet would sometimes watch us together with a soft, unreadable smile. "You spoil her, Richard," she'd say. And maybe I did. But I had sworn the day I first held her that she would never know abandonment. And I meant it. Back then, I thought Jonathan's ghost couldn't touch us. He was gone, lost in his own chaos. I was the one present, the one building her world. I thought that would be enough. But love, I would learn, isn't always stronger than blood. And the day Janet told her the truth, everything began to crumble. 14 is a strange age. Not quite a child, not yet a woman. Old enough to ask hard questions, too young to understand the answers. Faith had grown into a tall, sharp-eyed girl, with Janet's smile but a restlessness I couldn't always place. She was bright, curious, full of opinions. But sometimes, I'd catch her staring into the mirror, frowning like she was searching for something. One evening, after dinner, she lingered at the table. Her fork scraped at her plate, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could tell she was working up the courage to say something. "Dad," she began. Her voice trembled slightly. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, setting down my glass. She hesitated, then blurted out, "Why don't I look like you?" The room went still. Janet's fork clinked against her plate. My heart stuttered in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She shifted in her seat, eyes darting between us. "At school, people ask why my last name isn't the same as yours. And sometimes, when I look at myself, I don't see you. Am I really your daughter?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I opened my mouth to answer, but Janet's hand touched mine lightly under the table. She shook her head. "She deserves to know, Richard." "No," I whispered back, panic tightening my chest. "Not like this." But it was too late. Janet turned to Faith, her face heavy with guilt. "Faith, Richard is your father in every way that matters. But biologically," she swallowed hard, "your birth father's name is Jonathan." The name hung in the air like a curse. Faith's eyes widened. "Jonathan," she said it slowly, as though tasting it, rolling it around her tongue like candy. "Where is he? Why hasn't he ever come?" Janet's shoulders slumped. "He wasn't ready. He made mistakes. Richard stepped in because he loved you, because he chose you." But Faith wasn't listening. She repeated the name again, almost in a whisper. "Jonathan." She excused herself from the table and disappeared into her room. The sound of her door closing echoed like a gunshot. That night, through the walls, I heard her crying. And for the first time, I felt something I had never felt before when it came to Faith: fear. Not fear of her safety, not fear of her health, but fear of losing her heart. It didn't take long. Teenagers with social media and curiosity are like detectives. Within weeks, Faith had tracked him down. She found his photos online. Tattoos ran down his arms. His hair was dyed silver blue. He posed in bars, on motorbikes, holding guitars. He looked nothing like a father. He looked like trouble wrapped in leather. But to Faith, he was dazzling. The first time she told me she'd found him, her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. "He's so cool, Dad. You should see his tattoos. And he plays guitar, like real music, not old stuff." I forced a smile, though my stomach twisted. "Cool, huh? Yeah, I'm going to message him." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Faith, maybe don't rush into this. You don't know what kind of person he is now. He wasn't there for you." She frowned. "That's because he didn't get the chance. Maybe he'll explain. Maybe he'll be different." "Sweetheart, don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't make excuses for keeping him from me." My words died in my throat. A month later, she came home glowing. "I met him today," she announced. The world tilted. "You what?" "We had lunch. He's amazing. He told me stories about when he was younger, how he used to play in a band, how he wanted to travel the world. You should have seen him, Dad." Everyone at the restaurant was staring at his tattoos. I tried to keep my voice calm. "And who paid for lunch?" She hesitated. Then her tone turned casual, dismissive. "He forgot his wallet." "But it's fine. I told him you'd cover it. Can you transfer some money to my account?" The words cut deep. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Sure." That night, I sat in the dark living room long after everyone had gone to bed. My hands shook as I stared at the ceiling. She had called him amazing. And me? I was just the man footing the bill. It became a pattern. Every outing with Jonathan ended with my phone buzzing. "Dad, can you send money? He forgot his wallet again." "Dad, can you cover our Uber? He doesn't have cash." "Dad, can you lend him a little? He's trying, you know?" And every time, I paid. Because she still called me Dad. Because I thought love, even strained, was worth the price. But something was changing. She began calling him Dad too. The first time I heard it, she was on the phone in the kitchen. Her laughter spilled through the doorway. "Thanks, Dad." My chest caved in. She came out, still smiling, and when she saw me standing there, her smile faltered. "I mean biological Dad." But the damage was done. Janet tried to soothe me. "She's just curious, Richard. She'll realize in time who truly raised her." But her family made things worse. Auntie Jay would gush about Jonathan whenever Faith brought him around. "Ah, he's so lively. He has that spark, unlike Richard." Her grandmother would say, "Blood is blood. Nothing can change that." Once a boy who looked up to me started treating me with indifference, like I was just the mechanic brother-in-law. They never fully accepted me. I was good enough to fix their problems, pay their bills, carry their burdens, but not good enough to be seen as truly part of them. And Faith, she was slipping further into Jonathan's orbit day by day. It started small. Faith would come home after meeting Jonathan and gush about his tattoos, his stories, his cool vibe. "Dad, did you know he once slept in a van while touring with his band?" she said one evening, eyes wide with admiration. "That's so adventurous." I bit back my words. To me, it sounded like recklessness. To her, it was gold. Another time, she came back with a cheap bracelet Jonathan had bought her from a roadside stand. She held it up like it was treasure. "Isn't it beautiful?" He said it reminded him of me. I looked at the flimsy chain, already tarnished, and thought about the months I'd spent building her a handcrafted jewelry box for her birthday. That gift now gathered dust on her shelf, untouched. Her obsession grew with each meeting. She'd pepper conversations with his name. "Jonathan says this. Jonathan thinks that. Jonathan wouldn't like this food. He's more into street stuff." And though she still called me dad in the house, it was laced with impatience, like I was a substitute teacher filling in for the real thing. It was her sophomore year of high school when her teacher called for a PTA meeting. Faith had been struggling with math, and the school wanted both parents to attend. The meeting was scheduled on a weekday afternoon, the same time I was meant to oversee an urgent delivery at the garage. A client had threatened to pull thousands of dollars worth of contracts if I wasn't there in person. My boss looked me dead in the eye when I asked for time off. "Richard, if you miss this, don't bother showing up tomorrow." I thought about it all night. The bills, the mortgage, the health insurance that covered Faith. But when the morning came, I ironed my shirt, picked up my folder, and walked into that school like nothing else mattered. When the teacher began her report, Faith sat slouched in her seat, eyes rolling, whispering to her friend instead of listening. I still smiled, still nodded, still asked about tutoring options. On the way home, I tried to encourage her. "Faith, I know math isn't easy, but I believe in you. We'll work on it together." She sighed dramatically. "You didn't have to come, you know. Jonathan said he would have come if he had the time." The words lodged in my chest. That night, I got a call from my boss. My position was cut. I'd lost the job, but I didn't regret going. Not then, because I thought she'd remember, that she'd understand someday what it cost me to sit beside her in that meeting. I was wrong. By the time Faith turned 16, Jonathan had rebranded himself in her eyes as some misunderstood rock star turned sage. She started asking me for bigger sums of money under the guise of school projects or group outings. But I'd noticed Jonathan wearing new shoes, new jackets, the kind I knew Faith couldn't afford on her own. One evening, I confronted her gently. "Sweetheart, I've noticed you've been asking for a lot more money lately. Are you sure it's for school?" Her eyes flared. "Why do you always think the worst of me? You don't understand him. He's trying. He needs a little help, that's all." "Faith," I said softly, "he's supposed to be the father. Why am I the one paying for his meals, his clothes, his outings with you?" She crossed her arms, her teenage defiance sharp as glass. "Because you can. And he can't. You're just jealous because he's real and you're not." Those words, they sliced deeper than any blade. Our bond thinned with each passing month. She began spending weekends with Jonathan, leaving me alone in the house with Janet. She'd text me only when she needed money. "No, how are you, Dad?" "No, I love you." Just demands. And the nights she returned, she'd rave about him endlessly. "Jonathan says tattoos are like scars with stories. Jonathan says money doesn't matter. Life is about freedom. Jonathan says you're too uptight." I would sit quietly, listening, my hands folded tightly in my lap to keep from shaking. She didn't see the bags under my eyes, the exhaustion from double shifts after losing my job, the effort it took just to keep the lights on. She only saw Jonathan, her shiny, broken idol. It would have been easier if Janet's family defended me, but they didn't. At family gatherings, Faith would bring Jonathan along, proudly introducing him as Dad. Auntie J would laugh loudly, slapping Jonathan on the back. Finally, some energy in this family. Her grandmother would beam, saying, "Blood will always call blood." And me? I was the quiet shadow in the corner. The man who paid for the food they ate, the house they sat in, the clothes on Faith's back. Yet, in their eyes, I was invisible. Even Janet didn't speak up. She'd just place a hand on my knee under the table, a silent plea for patience. But patience, I realized, was running out. Faith's 19th birthday. I booked her favorite restaurant weeks in advance. Reserved a quiet corner table, even ordered a custom cake with "To my beautiful daughter, love, Dad." But when we arrived, Jonathan was already there, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Faith squealed, running to him. "Surprise," she shouted. "He's joining us." I clenched my jaw. The table I'd carefully set for three suddenly had an intruder. Halfway through dinner, Jonathan pulled out a cheap silver pendant from his pocket and slid it across to her. Her eyes lit up. "This is the best gift ever." The custom gold bracelet I had saved 3 months for sat unopened in its little box, pushed aside, forgotten. Faith won a university award for community service. The auditorium was packed, lights bright, cameras flashing. When her name was called, I jumped to my feet, clapping until my hands stung. But instead of scanning the crowd for me, her eyes locked on Jonathan. She waved at him, grinning proudly, and when she took the stage, she said into the mic, "Thank you to my dad, Jonathan, for inspiring me to never give up." The applause thundered. My heart cracked. Janet glanced at me from the row beside, guilt flickering in her eyes. But she didn't speak. At a cousin's wedding, the photographer gathered the families together for a big group shot. When it was our turn, Faith tugged Jonathan by the arm and whispered to the photographer, "Make sure my real dad is next to me." The word stung. Real dad. I stood on the far side of the group, half cut from the frame, holding my forced smile, while Jonathan wrapped his arm around her like he'd been there all along. Later, when the photos circulated online, people tagged Jonathan proudly. My name never appeared. Faith called me one evening, nervous about an internship interview. I sat with her for hours, rehearsing questions, printing her resume, ironing her blouse. The next day, Jonathan offered to drive her. His car broke down halfway, and she missed the interview completely. When she returned, she was furious. "If you'd bought me a better car, I wouldn't have had to rely on him." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The car she drove was mine. The preparation she had done was mine. But the blame, always mine, never his. One Sunday, during testimony, Faith stood at the pulpit. With tears in her eyes, she said, "I want to thank God for my father, Jonathan, who inspires me every day with his resilience." The congregation clapped. Heads turned toward Jonathan, nodding approvingly. I sat frozen in the pew, my Bible heavy in my lap. The same congregation that once praised me for raising another man's child now looked at me with polite sympathy, as though I had been demoted publicly. Jonathan once came to me privately. His voice was hushed, almost respectful. "Richard, brother, I know you love Faith. Can you help me out with just $2,000? She doesn't have to know. It'll make me look good in front of her." I stared at him, disgust simmering under my skin. "You want me to fund your image? To pay for the illusion that you're a good father?" He shrugged. "She sees me as dad. You might as well get used to it." I walked away, fists trembling, resisting the urge to strike him. One night, Faith scrolled through her phone in the living room, showing Janet a slideshow she had made. It was titled, "My Dad, My Hero." Photo after photo of Jonathan filled the screen. Him strumming his guitar, him laughing at a cafe, him posing with Faith in a selfie. Not one photo of me. I quietly retreated to the garage, my chest hollow. On the workbench sat the old camcorder I had used to record her childhood, her first steps, her first day at school, her first Christmas play. Those tapes would never see the light of day again. The morning of Faith's graduation, the house buzzed like a festival. Janet's mother adjusted her hat in the mirror, Kay ironed his shirt. Aunt Jay dabbed perfume on her wrists. I stepped into the living room, still in my work clothes, smiling faintly. So, what time are we leaving? Silence. They exchanged quick glances, like schoolchildren caught in a lie. Finally, Janet cleared her throat. Richard, about that. There were only 5 tickets. I frowned. 5? Well, that's fine. It's just family, right? Me, you, her grandma, Aunt Jay, and Kay. From the bedroom, Faith's voice cut sharp as glass. I already gave mine out. Mom, Grandma, Auntie Jay, Kay, and my father. My blood turned to ice. I stepped closer to the doorway. What did you say? She turned, adjusting the zipper of her gown, her eyes flat, her voice casual. You're not invited. I gave the last ticket to my dad. Jonathan. The room tilted. My legs felt like stone. I searched Janet's face for help, for protest, for something, but she lowered her eyes, silent. Her family said nothing. No one defended me. My throat tightened. The little girl who once wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered goodnight. Daddy had just buried me alive with 6 words. You're not invited, Dad. I forced myself to stand tall. My voice came out cracked, but steady. I see. Enjoy your day. I walked out before the tears could betray me. No one followed. That evening, alone in the garage, I pictured her walking across the stage in the gown I paid for, smiling for photos taken by the man who had abandoned her. Jonathan had stolen my seat, my name, my place, and the worst part? She gave it to him. The next morning, something inside me hardened. Years of humiliation, of being invisible, of being replaced, all of it coiled into a single decision. If they didn't want me as a father, they would no longer have me as a provider. I made the calls one by one. The insurance company. Remove Faith's name from my health plan. Effective immediately. The car insurance provider. Yes, cancel her coverage. She's no longer under my policy. My lawyer. I want her out of my will. Every document updated. Everything rewritten. The bank. Close the joint account I opened for her. Transfer all funds back to me. With every signature, every confirmation number, I felt the chains on my chest break. By sundown, Faith was financially alone. The storm came quickly. Janet's mother stormed into the house, eyes blazing. How dare you cut her off? She's just a child. She's 22, I said coldly. Old enough to choose. Old enough to face consequences. Aunt Jay spat venom. You're cruel, Richard. After all you've done, you'd abandon her now? I laughed bitterly. Abandon her? Where was Jonathan when she was born? Where was he when she was sick, or hungry, or scared? Don't you dare lecture me about abandonment. Even Kay called me heartless. She's your daughter, he shouted. I stared him dead in the eye. No. She made her choice. She chose him. Let him provide for her now. For the first time in my life, I didn't waver. Weeks passed. The house grew silent. No more, Dad, can you send money? No more hugs. No more calls. Faith stopped coming home. Janet and I barely spoke. I overheard her once, crying in the kitchen. Jonathan said he'd help me, but he doesn't have money. He promised he'd get a job, but her voice cracked. I stayed in the garage, tightening bolts on a carburetor, pretending not to hear. Jonathan was still the same man he had always been. Unreliable, selfish, hollow. But this time, Faith saw it. The shine wore off. Reality set in, and she realized too late what she had thrown away. Months later, I heard it, a timid knock at my door. Faith stood there, makeup smudged, gown long returned, her eyes red from crying. Dad, she whispered. Her voice broke. I made a mistake. My heart twisted. Every instinct screamed to pull her into my arms, to tell her it was okay, to remind her that love never dies. But then I remembered that night. You're not invited, Dad. My father already has the last ticket. I steadied my breath and shook my head. You made your choice, Faith. Now live with it. Her lips trembled, tears spilling. Please, Dad. I need you. I closed the door. Sometimes, in the still of the night, I remember her as a little girl. Her tiny hands gripping mine, her soft voice calling me Daddy, her laughter echoing through the house. But that little girl is gone. She died the day she traded love for blood and stupidity. And me? I finally chose myself. What would you do differently if you found yourself in such position? Did I do the right thing by letting her go? Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more revenge stories of when life keeps the perfect grudge. Thank you for watching.